Welcome to Brands of Value, the show where we explore evergreen strategies in marketing and business. I am your host, David Götz, and today's guest is Billy Broas. Billy Broas is the master of simplicity. He recently co-authored a book together with Tiago Forte, one of his previous clients, called Simple Marketing for Smart People. In this podcast, we will discuss how simplicity helps to make your marketing more simple and approachable, both for you and your customer. We will also discuss Billy's 5 light bulbs framework and how to apply it to your messaging. Let's go. Welcome to the show, Billy Broas.
Thanks for having me, David.
In this podcast, we want to talk about simplicity in marketing, and I've brought just the right specialist for you, as you heard in the intro. But what makes you, Billy, uniquely qualified to talk about simplicity in marketing?
Yeah, well, I was really learning this in the trenches. I have more of a formal marketing background. I got my fancy degree, I got my MBA, and I used that in my career. But then when it came time to leave and do my own thing, start an online business, I found that that degree wasn't that useful when it came to what I was doing, which was selling online courses. And so I really learned out of necessity because I wanted to leave my job.
Awesome. And you worked with quite some famous people. I saw like Tiago Forte, who you wrote your book with as well, or Ali Abdaal. Are there any more people that we could maybe name drop right at the start so people know that you're fully legit?
Yeah, well, a lot of people know Ryan Deiss. He's the president of digitalmarketer.com and the Scalable Company. Kimberly Snyder is very well known in the health and nutrition space. So the commonality between them is they're all subject matter experts. So they're all these smart people, like the title of the book. And the drawback of that, the great thing about that is that they can create very good products and services because they know their topic in such depth. The drawback of that is that it becomes difficult for them to explain the value of what they do to people who aren't experts.
So in your book, in the intro, you write something about your connection to Gary Vaynerchuk. How did that come to happen, and what happened there?
Yeah, well, like I said, I was trying to leave my job, and what I was trying to do was sell online courses in the beer brewing industry. So I started this blog where I was reviewing beer, talking about making it. And he was such a great model for me because right around the same time, he was getting started with Wine Library TV. That was the name of his business. And so Gary, his dad had a wine business in New Jersey, and in order to sell more wine at their physical location, he started this online business, this podcast, which became bigger than the brick and mortar location. So he was doing the wine thing, and he was quite a few steps ahead of me. And so it was just a great model for me. So him doing online business in wine, me doing online business in beer. And then we also had the connection of growing up in a similar location in New Jersey.
Awesome. I guess the alcohol industry unites people as well.
It brings people together, for sure. It has been for thousands of years.
Now, this show is called Brands of Value. And I ask every guest what their definition of value is. And I'd like to know from you, what is value to you, Billy?
I believe that there's different types of value, and I think that's really important too. What I've noticed is that we tend to, myself and also the people I worked with, we're so close to our product that again, that's good, but we also go into it thinking that we know what the other person values. But I've realized that you really have to get into the customer's shoes and identify what they value. And it might be the utility of the product or service. That's kind of the default answer. But it might be something else as well. We sell a lot of products based on storytelling and meaning, and that's quite different. That's something quite different than utility. So that's how I define value. It's really getting in the customer's shoes and seeing what they value, and then aligning our marketing message with that.
So you agree that marketing creates value beyond the initial physical value of a product?
Yeah, and there's a great study. I don't know if you read this one or listened to it. It was on NPR a number of years ago, and it's called Significant Objects. And so it was researchers, and then this study was presented on NPR, and what they did was, it's really interesting. They did a split test, essentially, where they took everyday objects they would find at an antique store, something like a doll, some cheap doll, and they would post it on eBay and see what they could sell it for. Then they would attach a story to it. So now it wasn't just a doll, but it was the grandma's doll, and the grandma went through the story of hardship and everything, and it has a certain meaning to it. And the result was something like they could sell it for 2,000% more. The price was 2,000% more by attaching this meaning to it. So it's not just based on the utility. The value is also based on meaning as well. And I think that study exemplifies that.
Yeah, I absolutely love that study, and you should totally look it up. It's a really awesome thing. But now you should probably stay with us in the podcast because we're about to talk about the topic of simplicity. But simplicity, why are we even talking about this? I think that especially with people who've studied marketing, we often tend to overcomplicate things. And that is a problem because not everybody who works in marketing has studied, and also not everybody who has to do marketing has a marketing background. So what's your take on this, Billy?
Yeah, so I have to define the way that I think about simplicity. So I come from the energy industry. That was the career that I was leaving when I started this online beer brewing business. And so I think about simplicity as the biggest bang for your buck. I think about it as the 80-20 rule. What's the 20% of inputs that get us to 20% of outputs? And again, when you're in that industry, you're working with things like steam turbines to power a power plant. And you have to look at the fuel you're putting in. You put in coal or you put in biofuels, and how much energy do you get out of that? And so when I came into marketing, I saw that there's so many little details and so many things that you could spend your time on. And if you look at your calendar, and when I looked at mine, when I looked at my clients, I realized that a lot of the time was being spent on things that just don't move the needle. So, harnessing that experience from the energy industry, I said, okay, well, what is the one thing that matters the most? And for me, in my experience, and finally figuring out how to sell these darn online beer brewing courses, it was the messaging. It was the words on the page. When I realized that I could just rewrite a headline on my sales page and double the number of people that bought from that page, then I stopped fiddling around with all the tactics like WordPress plugins and countdown timers and all that. So that's how I view simplicity. What gives you the biggest bang for your buck?
Awesome. I mean, that's where the value is, right? So within that sort of construct, you often use a metaphor of upstream versus downstream things to do. Could you dive into that a little bit?
Yeah, I love metaphors because they do so well in conveying a point. And so I could tell people, and I would tell my clients, hey, the messaging is more important. But if I could put it into a metaphor, then it really sinks in more. And so the idea is that things that you do upstream, activities that you engage in upstream, have a huge downstream effect. And so the upstream downstream metaphor is that if you think about a river, the source of the river, that is in marketing your core message. And we can go into how I define a core message and what its attributes should be if we want. But upstream, you have your core message. And then downstream, you have two things. You have your marketing channels. So you think about these as these might be branches off the river. So these are your distribution channels. So this might be Facebook, this might be email, it might be direct mail, it might be skywriting. And then the second one is tactics. And so you might think about these as you're paddling down this river. This might be a certain paddling technique you use to get around a rock. And so in marketing, this might be that countdown timer, upsells, downsells, limited time offers, things like that.
And I guess if the flow rate upstream is only a trickle, then downstream, it doesn't really matter what you do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And if you choose the wrong path, if what you do is not solid, if you're not sending a coherent, compelling marketing message downstream, which is what I witnessed when I would review these sales pages for my clients, they were using all these bells and whistles, but those things didn't matter because they didn't have this compelling core message.
Now, one thing that is in your book that is sort of really dear to my heart as well is this idea that marketing isn't inherently bad and that people need to realize that in order to do better marketing. What do you mean by that?
Well, it certainly has a stereotype, doesn't it? It's not like a profession like nursing, where you think about something like nursing or teaching, and you get positive emotions, and you think, oh man, those are just great people, those nurses, those teachers. I wish, you're right, because I'm a marketer, you're a marketer. I wish people put me in the same category as those two. But no, you think about marketers, you think about deception, you think about the used car salesman, you think about infomercials. But it's survivorship bias, right? It's that the loud examples are the ones that we notice. But we can all think about, there are examples out there of marketing done correctly, marketing done morally, marketing done authentically. And so you have a choice. And yeah, you could choose that deceptive, smarmy way of going about sales and marketing, or you can choose this other path, this more authentic path. And if you go into it, most of my clients and the students in our programs, they are not professional marketers. They know their topic really well, and they are either self-employed or small business owners, and they realize they got to do this thing called marketing. And if they go into it with this cynicism, right? That it's a bad thing. It creates this contradiction, and it's kind of like you have one foot on the gas pedal, but one foot on the brake, and it can really hold you back.
Absolutely. And there's actually a statistic from Germany which puts marketing people just one step above insurance brokers at the bottom of the list of jobs to be desired, which is quite sad. And I'm on a mission to really change that because I think that marketing can be beautiful. And hopefully, with the simplicity that we're going to talk about today, we're going to get some framework into how we can make that reality. So why should you even care? Why not just outsource the whole thing? Why not just go, hey, you marketing agency, do all my stuff? And that would be the simplest answer to me. Why is that a bad idea?
Yeah, well, if you understand, and nothing against marketing agencies, but if you understand how they work, you realize why that's not the best idea. And even companies that work with big marketing agencies or even multiple big marketing agencies, like big brands like Coca-Cola, they still have internal marketing departments. And especially for the businesses I tend to work with, which tend to be small, medium-sized businesses, the agencies, contractors, they are looking for efficiency. And they are typically not going to take the time to understand your product at the depth that you do or understand your customer at the depth that you do. I've been in the fortunate position where I've been on, one of the reasons why I discovered messaging was the key thing was because I dove into copywriting. I'm a big fan of copywriting and studying the great copywriters. And there's often this relationship in small businesses between a small business and a copywriter. And I've been on both sides of that. And I've noticed that there's really two scenarios where either the copywriter comes into the business to help write copy, put out marketing material, and the business owner has not done the upfront work in defining their core message. And that's not a good situation. The copywriter also often has scope creep, where now they're more of a strategist, not just writing copy. They're doing stuff that the business should have done, where they're interviewing customers, figuring out who the customer is. The better situation is the much better situation, you get much better results when that copywriter comes in, that core message is figured out, the customer is figured out, and that copywriter can do what they do best, which is just write copy.
So I guess it might be more simple to just say you do all of that agency, but it's not as effective. And obviously it's always a balance between simplicity and effectiveness.
Yeah, I get a lot of people who come to me who have been burned by agencies.
Yeah, I feel you. There's a lot of bad stuff and bad advice going around. Anyways, you have a system for simplicity, and it starts with belief building. So, Billy, you've written a whole book called Simple Marketing for Smart People. And in that book, it's a lot of time is dedicated to the topic of belief building. What is belief building?
Yeah, so I really learned this again by studying these old copywriters and reading these classic sales letters, often very long ones, and really putting on x-ray glasses and studying what they were doing. And even within the words, it's not just about the words. It's actually, to use that metaphor again, upstream of the words. And what I realized that they were doing was that they were building belief. And so in the book, we posed this question: if complexity and overwhelm is a result of all these details, all this multiplicity, all these tactics and everything, then simplicity has to be the opposite of that. It can't be many things. It has to be one thing. And so the one thing we give you in the book, which is this question: what does my customer need to believe in order to buy? Kind of a provocative question. It really expands in your mind and makes you think. And so if the customers don't have these beliefs, so for example, if they don't believe that your product works for people like them in their geography, in their location, or for their industry, it doesn't matter how much you discount your price. They're not going to buy. And so then your job becomes, through your marketing content, to build belief. And that's what I realized. That was the light bulb moment for me, was that is the job of marketing. And I think this is very well summed up in the great quote by the management consultant Peter Drucker, where he says, the goal of marketing is to make selling superfluous. And what I realized is that what he meant by that was, if you build the belief in the mind of your customer, if you educate them, because I really see marketing as education on how to value products like yours, then the selling part becomes pretty easy, becomes superfluous, and you don't need to resort to the hard sell or the arm twisting or any of those things that our clients and students really hate.
So in order to start identifying the current beliefs of your customers, you obviously need to know who your customer is, or could you even start with identifying beliefs before you know who your customer is?
It certainly helps to have an idea, at least a fuzzy idea. And you want to think about who that customer is. Yes, when they enroll with you, sign up with you, pay you, but you also want to think about who that person is when they're not quite there yet, when they don't quite have those beliefs yet. So it really depends on the context that you're talking about.
So you've identified who your customers are, and you're trying to find out what their current beliefs are. How would you go about that?
Yeah, well, in the book we give a few ways, and one of them is that I like a lot is to think about the bad questions that they ask. You might even call these dumb questions, right? And I think any subject matter expert has experienced these, where someone will ask you a question who's interested in what you do. Maybe they're a prospect, and you think, just why are you worrying about that? Why are you answering that question? That is so in the weeds. That is so not important. But celebrate when you hear that, because what that signals to you is that there's just a mismatch. There's a mismatch between what you know is important and what they think is important. And so what you want to do then is to make those things match, so that what they know important is what you know is important. And then to bridge that gap, to make up that difference, is when you use this technique of belief building.
I really identified myself with one example you gave in the book to that, which is the photographer being asked, which camera should I buy to make better pictures? I get that question a lot because I photograph as like a little side hustle as well. And people keep asking me, how good of a picture does that camera take, or how good of a picture does that camera take? And it's rooted in the belief that cameras take pictures, when in reality it's the human behind the camera who needs to take the picture, and the camera is just a tool. And that's the sort of belief that we're talking about here, that there's a gap between people thinking, hey, cameras take good pictures, or it really, really matters how good a camera is for the end result, and the reality being, hey, it's all about the way you see and the way you compose a picture, and the camera's a very final step towards the end of that process. So that's a really cool idea. Is there any other ways of identifying what the current beliefs of your customers are?
Yeah, so talking to them, and I know that's tough for a lot of people. That sounds very obvious, but it's amazing how many people just don't talk to their customers. And it's not talking to them and asking, hey, what do you think of my product? It's really about them. And I recommend having them walk through a typical cycle in using your product, or a product like yours. So for example, if you're a financial advisor, or you help people with their finances, you might ask them, hey, walk me through what it's like when you get your paycheck, when your paycheck comes in every 2 weeks. You and your husband, what's that conversation like? What do you do with the money? People's actions, this is a very interesting thing, about belief, is that what you believe is not always what you proclaim. And you can often better understand people's beliefs by their actions instead. So if you try to uncover those actions, you can learn a lot about what they believe.
Yeah, that's also a big issue with focus groups, because people know that they're in a focus group, and once they're being observed, they act in a way like they want to be observed, not in the way that they would act naturally, which is why I actually wrote my thesis on social listening as a topic, and how you can maybe find out through what people say online about things, how they act. But in the end, it's an empathy exercise, right?
Yeah, it really is. It really is. And which isn't easy, understanding someone's worldview, because it can often conflict with how you see the world, and you might even disagree with their worldview and how they go about things. And so you really have to set that aside as much as possible, which is why, empathy is known to not be an easy task.
So once you know what the current belief of the customers are, what's the next step?
Right. So the current beliefs, and you identify the required beliefs. We were kind of getting at this earlier, which is, what do they need to believe in order to buy? Well, they need to believe that my product works for people like them. They need to believe such and such is important. For example, in photography, they need to believe that it's the person who takes the photo and not the camera that takes the photo. So what you do is you identify those beliefs, and there can be quite a few. And in the book, we go into a way that you can organize them so you don't get this belief bloat, as we call it, because this exercise can cause that, where these beliefs explode. So we can help you put them into buckets. But once you identify, but now you're in good shape, because you have the existing beliefs, you have the required beliefs, and then it's just a matter of bridging that gap.
And you bridge that gap with your marketing, right? That's your idea for how marketing should work.
Yes, you bridge that gap with your marketing and through argumentation. And that was a big aha that I had too. And that was what I realized when I was studying these old sales letters was they weren't just doing copywriting. What copywriting really is it's the art of rhetoric. It's the art of argumentation. And I realized that even I would say most copywriters don't even know what they're doing. They might be very good at what they do, pragmatically because it works, but they don't understand that their discipline goes back over 2,000 years, back to Aristotle. And so once you understand what you're doing, once you understand that it is rhetoric, it is argumentation, then you can ask, well, how do I get better at that? How do I get better at argumentation? And then that's, again, what the book goes into, how to do that.
Zooming out a little bit, would you agree that marketing is more of a process rather than an action, if you know what I mean?
How would you distinguish between the two, just so I'm on the same page?
So we've looked at your belief system, and it's more of a process rather than a singular action that you take. And I guess you have to revisit that process every now and then. Am I right about that?
Yes, and I also think it depends on what your role is. For example, a couple of weeks ago, I was giving a talk in LA, and there was a business owner there, and she has a team. And she was saying, well, they're largely focused on these channels because she was now aware of the upstream downstream metaphor and marketing channels. And she said, well, should I teach them this as well, this metaphor, upstream downstream? Mm-hmm. And I said, yes, it's valuable for them to know what they are doing and where what they do, the context in which it fits in. However, if that is their job, look, there's a real need for channel experts. And you have to be aware too, because I noticed that a lot of people fall for this, where you'll have the channel expert. A lot of them become gurus. They're like the YouTube ads expert, right, or like the Facebook expert or something, and they call themselves a marketing expert. They're not. They're channel experts. They know how to use the platform very well. That's different than more of, I would say, the strategist role or the role that the business owner has, where they're aware of all these different channels. And they say, okay, well, I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. We'll test them all. So I think it's valuable to have those channel experts. It's like we were talking about earlier. We were talking about algorithms and social media algorithms. It's important for people to know that stuff really well. I also think it can be beneficial for them to see the larger picture too, and how what they do fits into that larger picture. But sometimes it can be challenging, and you might not want to take someone from, make a channel specialist, a marketing strategist.
And there's a lot of depth to each channel as well, which is why it's good that there's different people for different things. What I want to get to as well is at what sort of pace or rhythm should this whole process of belief building be revisited? Or are there trigger moments within a product cycle that you should revisit the whole belief framework again?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so what we recommend is creating a core message first and then distributing it downstream. That's an upstream downstream metaphor. And that core message is it's a living, breathing document. It should always be updated. And so your question was, what might be some trigger moments? So if you've perhaps exhausted, let's say, the true believers. So we typically have these people who are close to us. They might have been email subscribers for a while. They know us really well. They like us a lot. They have most of those beliefs required in order to buy. They don't need a whole lot of education. So that's a big plus. The minus is there's not a whole lot of them, and you tend to exhaust them fairly quickly, in which case you find yourself having to advance into these, if you think about it as concentric circles, into the outermost circles. And that's where you need to revisit your core messaging document and say, okay, well, what are the beliefs of these people, and what communication do we need to use, which is going to be different than the true believers, to reach the slightly colder audience.
So you say once you've exhausted your audience, but are there any other trigger aspects, like a change in your product maybe, or what else could contribute to you having to revisit that process?
Certainly a change in your product, any updates that come out. We work with a lot of online course creators, and so there will often be a version 2 of the course that comes out, and that requires building belief. So there's those internal factors, but also external factors as well. So for example, AI, that really became mainstream, I would say, last year. And even if your product doesn't involve AI, people are asking that question, your customers are asking that question, like, hey, how does this affect what we were doing? It's important to build those beliefs as well. So you really have to, and this is why it bugs me when people say, I just want to automate my marketing or passive income or whatever. It's like, no, like even if you lock your thing down, the world is always spinning, things are always changing, and you need to keep your ear to the ground and keep communicating, building these beliefs to your audience.
So we've talked about how you need to identify the current beliefs, how you need to see what people need to believe in order to want to buy the product. And then we came to messaging and communicating that whole gap or trying to bridge the gap. In your book, you write that marketing needs to make an argument, and it's all about the claim proof model. Could you dive into that?
Yeah. So what I realized that the big missing skill set in learning copywriting, and I did a lot of copywriting training, read books, hired a coach for a year, and this word was never mentioned, but the word is philosophy. And the tools of philosophy, so the tools of rhetoric and argumentation. And so think about a lawyer in a courtroom. That's a good model to follow. So what does the lawyer do? The lawyer has the client who he or she is defending, and they're trying to maybe get that person off the hook, and they're making claims or assertions and backing them up with evidence. And you're doing the same thing in marketing as well, even if you don't realize it. And that's the important part here, is that, like, I see marketing as argumentation, but you don't really have a choice. That is what you're doing. It's just a matter of how good a job are you doing with it.
And you've developed a whole framework that fits into that messaging thing. Could you talk to us about your 5 light bulbs? Sorry, again. Could you talk to us about the 5 light bulbs framework and how that whole framework fits into the idea of messaging?
Right. So I wanted to make something very easy for my clients to use and our students to use to create that core message. Something simple, of course, because I'm the simple guy, believe in simplicity, but not simplistic. Something that has a lot of depth to it, and that really, as was one person described the 5 light bulbs, it punches above its weight. And so this is a framework that you can use to create your core message, and I'll walk through it. So light bulb 1 represents language around the customer's problem. We call this your customer's status quo. This is really the language of empathy.
Do you want to give an example? Pardon?
Yeah, sure. So this is using the word you more than the word I or we. So you see a lot of marketing copy, you see a lot of websites that's just all about the company. We've been in business for 30 years, we've won these awards, but you think, yeah, there's a lot of this, but what does that person really want first? They want to feel seen. They want to feel acknowledged. I mean, I joke that I can write a book called The 5 Light Bulbs for Couples, because you can use this in relationships as well. I mean, I experienced this with my wife. She comes home and she's had a bad day, and me being the consultant, what do I want to do? Because I care about her. I want to jump right into solving her problem. Have you tried this? Have you tried this? Have you tried this? But what does she really want? Right? It's like, she just wants me to say, honey, like, I get you. That sucks. That sucks.
So then you show through your wording, so it's how you approach writing, that you care about the person and that you care about their problems and their view of the world. So you're basically at the point of their current belief, if we think back to the belief building, right?
Yes, exactly. They need to understand that you understand their situation. And if you get buy-in on that, if you get agreement on that, if you get belief on that, then you can move on and have more success with the remaining light bulbs.
So what's the next one?
Yeah, so they have this problem that they're dealing with, and they have multiple ways they can solve this problem. There are multiple bridges in front of them that they can cross to solve this problem. And so what you want to do as the business is, you don't want to ignore those bridges as much as you might be tempted to. You don't want to acknowledge the competitors, but actually we found the opposite is better. It's better to give voice to those other solutions. And then this is where the argumentation piece really comes into play, because what you don't want to do is some kind of cheap gimmick and just say, oh, well, that competitor, they stink. Right? Like that would be an ad hominem attack, to go back to our philosophy lesson, right? That's not a very good argument. And we believe in communicating to your prospects as if they are smart people who can understand an argument and make an informed decision. And I know that when I hear that, when someone's like, oh, don't buy from them, they stink, I'm like, that's not a very good argument. Like, I don't buy that. So what you want to do is lay out criteria. And you might say, well, they focus on this and this and this and this type of customer. However, we focus on this, and customers like you. So you are in your light bulb 2, which represents those other options. You are invalidating those other options, which leaves you as the only logical choice.
That sounds to me a lot like an idea I heard from Seth Godin, where he says, people like us do things like this, saying, there are many different versions of solving this problem, but people like us, people like you and me, we do it this way. And that's the right way for us. And there might be other versions out there, but we don't care, or we do care, but they're for other people.
Yeah, and he's a smart guy. That's Seth Godin. I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. So we've figured out that we catch people where they are, where they're at, and that they've maybe tried a few options, but that our way is the right way. What comes next?
Yeah, so this is what I think is the most interesting one, and tends to be the one that if people could just focus on one, they'll get the best results, and that's light bulb 3, which represents your unique approach. And I really learned this one from, again, the old copywriters, and especially Eugene Schwartz. And I know you've read his work and his stages of awareness, and he has another term that he talks about in his book, Breakthrough Advertising, called the mechanism. And what he discovered was that in markets that get really saturated, the messaging shifts. And the people who have success do shift their messaging. It shifts from the promise that is being made, which, spoiler alert, is light bulb 5, to how the promise is achieved, which he calls the mechanism, which I call light bulb 3. So it's a really cool one, and you see it turning up in all like for any type of product, and it goes by different terms. So yes, your approach, but it might also be, if you're a consultant, it might be the steps in your process. It might be your formula, your blueprint. If it's a health food, it might be the special spice or herb that's used. If it's clothing, like Under Armour, it might be the moisture wick technology. So your technology is your light bulb 3. It's different than your product. It's not your product. It's your approach.
It's the way you do things. It's the process by which the result is achieved, right? I'm playing, devil's advocate here, and I'm saying, why should I tell everybody how my process is? Isn't my process holy? And why should I share it? And maybe someone's about to copy it if I share it in my communication.
Yeah, it's funny. And there's a great anecdote from, again, the copywriting world. And so this was Claude Hopkins, and he went to the Schlitz Brewery, and I might be getting the copywriter wrong. I think it's Claude Hopkins. He went to, but it was the Schlitz Brewery, and they're walking him through the brewery. This back in, I want to say that this might be the 30s. And he's saying, he's blown away by their process. He's saying, oh my gosh, like you sanitize the bottles 5 different times. You pull your water from this artisanal well. You have the best microbiologists in the world who are taking care of your yeast. Why aren't you talking about this? And they said, well, this is just pretty standard. Like everyone does this. And he said, yeah, but no one else is giving voice to this. No one else is putting it into their marketing material. And so what they did was they gave voice to it. So there's a bunch of ads. You can look up the Schlitz Brewery ads. And it talks about the yeast and the bottles and the water and everything. And they shot from number 4 in the market to number 1 pretty quickly. So you'll find that, yeah, ideally you do have a very unique approach, but most people don't even need that to have a lot of success. It's just even talking about your approach, just even laying out your steps will get you most of the way there, because hardly anyone is doing that.
So to catch up, light bulb 1 is getting the people where they are. Light bulb 2 is talking about all the ways that a problem can be solved, but that ours is the right one. And light bulb 3 is saying, hey, and this is the way, this is the approach by which we achieve something. And then naturally follows light bulb 4, I guess.
Right, yeah, which is the one that most people think about when they think of sales and marketing. So it's the more boilerplate one. So it's your product name, it's the price, it's the guarantee, it's the bonuses, it's how the product is delivered. And so a big thing that we hear from clients and students is that when they see the other light bulbs, they say, oh man, this is great. Now I have other things to talk about.
What if a product isn't physical? So if it's like a service, you work with a lot of service-based businesses as well. How does that change the whole communication at Lightbulb 4?
Yeah, well, this works really well for service-based businesses, expert businesses, and the key is that divorcing Lightbulb 3 from Lightbulb 4 So an example I use is because you can have multiple light bulb 4s that use the same light bulb 3. Said another way, one light bulb 3 can apply to multiple light bulb 4s. So a lot of the people that I work with start out doing one-on-one work, and they have success with that, but eventually they hit a plateau and they're like, hey, I don't have any more coaching slots, or I can't take on any more clients. What do I do? Well, if it was all dependent on them and selling themselves, that's a problem. But once they develop a light bulb 3 and approach, then they can create products that they don't need to be there to deliver. Things like courses, things like group coaching programs.
Yes, you then separate the level of engagement and the scalability from the process, and that's quite beautiful.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you can help people of all budget levels. Like not everyone can afford your one-on-one work, but maybe they can buy a digital product from you that's based on the same philosophy, aka your light bulb 3.
Okay, so now we've talked about light bulb 4, which is all about the product or the service or your offer that you give. Now we get to the spicy bit, which is the benefit or the success that comes afterwards, right?
You got it. Yeah. So that's light bulb 5. That is that other side of the bridge where the birds are chirping, the sun is shining, and you still want to give voice to that. So you want to make sure that you talk about your light bulb 5. And again, for the people that we work with, this tends to be a blind spot for them because they have that curse of knowledge, and they assume that their prospect just gets it. They assume that if they talk about the product, that their customer will know what it will do for them. But again, that's the curse of knowledge at play there, and you still want to make sure that you check that box on light bulb 5.
Could you dive into a few words that are used at that stage? Is it something like imagine, or what kind of words would you use at that point?
Yeah, imagine is a great one. I mean, if we're talking specific copy, here's what could be, what life could be like. Picture this, imagine this, and then also really describing. We have this thing we call the movie scene technique, and it's fine to use words like that, imagine and all that, but like you really want to paint that picture. And so storytelling, giving an example, a star customer and what their life is now like, and making sure that the way that you write is something that your reader can see on a movie screen. We find that makes for a very compelling light bulb 5 copy.
Awesome. So could you, in a few words, summarize the 5 steps again, just so people catch it from your words, not from mine?
Sure. So light bulb 1 represents your customer's status quo. Light bulb 2 represents the other things that they've tried before or that they are considering or even being tempted by. Light bulb 3 represents your unique approach to solving the problem. Light bulb 4 represents your offer. And light bulb 5 represents your customer's new life.
Awesome. Now I'm going to play devil's advocate again. Good.
Please do.
And I'm going to say, why do we need another framework? There are a lot of frameworks in the world, and why should they use yours?
Well, it's interesting. I came out with a group coaching program for business owners in 2020, and it was 8 weeks, 8 modules. And the 5 light bulbs, I came up with it for this program. And it was like kind of a crazy story. Like it hit me. It was like inspiration. It was like what they talk about, the muse hitting you. And it was also so meta because I had a light bulb moment about light bulbs. And I was like literally drawing on a piece of paper that bridge I've been talking about. And we have those illustrations. I hired an illustrator, so you can see it on the website, 5lightbulbs.com. And so that was just the first module out of 8 modules. The rest of them were typical marketing things like lead generation and email marketing, things like that. But we did a poll at the end, and every single person in that cohort, except one, voted the 5 light bulbs as their favorite. And they wanted more. So the next time we ran the program, another 8 weeks, the 5 light bulbs was the entire program. It was all 8 modules. And so now we've taken like over 300 people through our program, different programs. And then I know that beyond that, thousands of people have used it just based on the stories that I get from people. So I don't know. It's resonated with people, and I'm just doubling down on what works.
Awesome. That's the way you should do marketing. Double down in business. Yeah. Double down on what works. I think that's totally underrated by a lot of people. And if it works, it works. And you might as well use it until it doesn't. Now, this podcast, Brands of Value, is all about value. When is the last time you felt like someone provided value beyond what you imagined in a business setting?
It's a good question, because I was actually thinking about this right before this interview. But AI, and specifically I use ChatGPT. I know there are other ones, but man, that is the best $20 a month that I spend. And I've been using it hardcore for about a year now. And it has made, in my business primarily, also my personal life, mainly my business, And it has, I would say, double my enjoyment in my business, the ease of my business, and it's getting me better results as well. So that's just providing tremendous value to me.
Talking about AI, do you feel like in the future maybe AI programs will get to a level where they can understand your framework and work with it? Or do you see the human factor within your framework as a very important aspect?
Yeah, so now you're peeking inside my laboratory. Yeah, we're already working on this. We're developing an AI tool right now, and we've actually run a couple. I mentioned those cohorts that we run. We've run a couple of those already. The name is Supercharge the 5 Light Bulbs with AI. And it is that specific name, too, for a reason, is because I think the mistake a lot of people make with AI is they pull up ChatGPT, they start a fresh chat, they jump right in, they say, write me an email. The framework has to come first. There's a lot of ways to write with AI, but if you first, in our case, identify the light bulbs, then you can turn to AI, train it on the light bulbs, and it learns it very quickly, and then it'll spit out that light bulb 1 email, that light bulb 2 email, etc.
So, all knowledge is based on what came before, and you've already mentioned Eugene Schwartz. What other people have you learned from, and would you recommend reading up into if they want to learn about copywriting and marketing? Who are your teachers?
Yeah, so Eugene Schwartz is certainly a top copywriter. Another one, a more modern one, passed away just a few years ago, Gary Halbert. And he's excellent, and a lot of his writings are online. His newsletter, I definitely recommend studying him. And then outside of copywriting, or I would say even more upstream of copywriting, I mentioned philosophy, and not, there's kind of two areas of philosophy. There's like answering the big questions, like where did we come from? Is there a God? Those kind of questions. But then there's also the tools that you use to make those arguments, and that's more so what's important for marketing and copywriting. I got a book right here that I recommend. It's kind of a textbook, but it's fantastic. Philosophy, the Quest for Truth, and there's a whole chapter in there about those tools of argumentation. And so I would even recommend studying that, and then you can get into the wordsmithing. I think that's more valuable to start upstream with how to make the argument, and then get into how to refine it through your words.
Now that we've learned where you learned from, where can people learn about specifically your products and your offering and your book, and where should they all go?
Best place is the book, yeah. So simplemarketingbook.com is our website. You can also find it on Amazon. We have paperback, Kindle, and audiobook. And that will give you an introduction to my approach to marketing. You can decide if you like it, if you don't. And then if you want to go deeper, like I mentioned, we have programs that can help you out with that.
And now to finish off, is there any anecdote of working with some of the people we've mentioned, like Ali Abdal or the other people you mentioned earlier, that you would like to drop at the end of the podcast?
Well, my co-author Tiago, we did a lot of work together, and for your listener, like, marketing is hard. It's really hard, and we can have all these theories about it. I have a lot of theories about it, frameworks and all that, but it really comes down to testing and experimentation. And I remember Tiago, he was talking about this, where he was testing out his different light bulbs. And it's because a lot of people ask me, like, what light bulb should I focus on? What order should they go in? They're like ingredients in a recipe, try out different recipes. And for him, it was light bulb 1. So he started writing more to his light bulb 1, like really empathizing with his reader, someone struggling with their personal productivity. And that really broke the dam for him in terms of growing his audience and his customers. Now, again, the lesson from this is not light bulb 1 is the right for you. It's the right one for you. It's to experiment. And so I'll leave your listener with that. Experimentation really is the key. But now you have some ideas, some ingredients to experiment with.
Is there a question that I should have asked that I haven't yet about your work or what you want to say to the world?
Well, I mentioned earlier, I've been writing more about this. I mentioned the idea of moral marketing and this idea of treating your customer as if they are a smart person. This is what David Ogilvy said. Your customer is not an idiot. It's your wife. And I think it's a conversation that we need to have more, because we live in a very science-minded society, and we brought a lot of science, and within science, especially like neuromarketing, into marketing. Facebook is hiring these neuroscientists to engineer these algorithms and the red dots on the apps and everything. And I think we need to ask ourselves, is this the right thing to do? Because just because we can do something doesn't mean that we should.
And on that note, thank you for being on the podcast, Billy Broas.
Thanks for having me, David. Great conversation.
And there we have it, people. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, Please don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, follow, save, all of these things down below. Ask any questions, especially here on Spotify. I've enabled the question function, and I will see you in the next episode. Cheers.